When we think of Troy, it's impossible not to imagine Achilles, Hector, Helen, and of course, the mythical wooden horse. We know all this thanks to the Iliad, the famous work attributed to Homer, written or rather, composed around the 8th century BC. But here comes the big question. Was Homer telling a true story, or did he simply give us history's most influential fantasy? The Iliad is an epic poem that narrates the events of the last year of the Trojan War, a war that, according to Greek tradition, lasted 10 years. However, the work is full of mythological elements, gods who descend from Olympus to intervene in battles, heroes with superhuman strength, prophecies, and sacred objects such as Achilles' armor forged by Hephaestus himself. For this reason, for a long time, historians considered the Trojan War to be pure literary fiction, an epic metaphor for conflict and glory. It was thought that Homer, if he really existed, simply took oral accounts and turned them into a heroic poem, more concerned with poetry than truth. But as time passed, archaeologists began to wonder. What if there is a kernel of truth behind the myth? After all, many ancient cultures kept distorted memories of real events. So why couldn't the Iliad be a poetic way of preserving a historical war? Some details are intriguing. For example, Homer describes weapons, combat tactics, and social structures that are more consistent with the Bronze Age, around 1200 BC, than with his own time. Is this a coincidence or a clue that Homer was drawing on older accounts and, perhaps, a real event that occurred centuries earlier? Today, many researchers believe that the Iliad is not a simple work of fiction, but a mosaic of collective memories, legends, and historical events mixed with mythology. A kind of dramatized history told with the intensity and beauty of an epic poem. So when you read or listen to the Iliad, remember this: you're not just reading a tale of heroes, you're reading a work that may contain echoes of a real war that took place more than 3,000 years ago, and that, in some ways, lives on in our imaginations. For centuries, the city of Troy was a mystery, a place that lived only in poetic verse and the collective imagination. The most skeptical said that it never existed, which was like Atlantis, a symbol, not a real city. But all that changed in the 19th century, thanks to a man obsessed with proving otherwise. His name was Heinrich Schliemann, a German businessman passionate about ancient texts. He was not a professional archaeologist, but he was convinced that Homer's Troy had not only existed, but could still be found. And most importantly, I thought I knew where to look. Inspired by descriptions in the Iliad and other classical sources, Schliemann set his sights on a mound in what is now Hazarlik, in present-day Turkey. Most scholars considered him just another dreamer, but in 1871 he began excavating, and what he found changed history. Beneath layers of earth and ruins, Schliemann unearthed the remains of an ancient fortified city, with walls, towers, and clear signs of destruction by fire. Although in his enthusiasm he caused serious damage to the archaeological site, yes, he literally dug like a careless miner, he had found what appeared to be a city worthy of legend. But here's the interesting part: it wasn't just one city. What Schliemann discovered was a site with multiple layers of occupation, each corresponding to different periods. Like an archaeological onion, Troy had been built, destroyed, and rebuilt several times over more than 3,000 years. Modern archaeologists have identified at least 9 overlapping Troys, numbered Troy I, Troy II, Troy III, through to Troy IX. The one that most likely coincides with the time of the Trojan War described by Homer is Troy VIA, dating from around 1200 BC, and shows clear evidence of violent destruction. Coincidence? Or definitive proof? Although we cannot be 100% sure that this is the same Troy mentioned by Homer. The truth is that there was a powerful, walled city destroyed by war in the very region and time described. And the most amazing thing is that, thanks to a mix of obsession, intuition, and luck, Schliemann managed to put on the map a city that many believed to be just a myth. Today, Hazarlik is officially recognized as the archaeological site of Troy, and has become one of the greatest bridges between history and legend. Homer's poetry is one thing, but what the earth and stones can tell us is quite another. But in the case of Troy, both versions begin to coincide in surprising ways. After the discovery of Hazarlik by Schliemann, more rigorous archaeologists, like Wilhelm Dorpfeld and later Karl Blegen, resumed the excavations with more careful methods. And that's when a more believable story began to take shape, and closer to Homer's epic than anyone expected. In particular, the city known as Troy Via, dating from between 1300 and 1190 BC, showed clear signs of violent destruction. Fallen walls, burned buildings, arrowheads embedded in the ruins, human remains among the rubble. All this indicates that Troy Via was devastated by war. And the most revealing aspect is the date. It coincides perfectly with the era of the so-called Sea Peoples, a period of crisis and widespread collapse in the eastern Mediterranean. In addition, the city had massive defensive walls and was strategically located next to a key trading strait, the Hellespont, today the Dardanelles Strait. This fits with the image of a powerful, wealthy Troy coveted by its rivals. And what about the loot? Schliemann claimed to have found a Priam's treasure containing gold, jewels, and ancient weapons. Although it was proven that this treasure was from an earlier era, the truth is that the city had riches, both in trade and resources. On the other hand, the weapons and ceramics found in Troy Via coincide with those used in Mycenae, the reign of Agamemnon according to mythology. This suggests that, if there was a war, the Mycenaeans may well have been involved. So, what does all this tell us? That there probably was a war, or several, for control of Troy. That the city was violently destroyed. And that historical facts and mythical narrative are intertwined, like roots beneath a buried city. Was it exactly as Homer described it? Surely not. There were no gods descending from heaven, nor perfect speeches in every battle. But the real basis, the spark that ignited the myth, seems to have been very real. Of all the mythical scenes in the Iliad and its later stories, the Trojan horse takes the prize for the most iconic, and possibly the most unlikely. The story is well known. The Greeks pretend to retreat, leaving a huge wooden horse as a peace offering. The Trojans bring him inside their city, and at night, surprise! Greek soldiers emerge from inside and open the gates to his hidden army. Result: Troy falls due to its own credulity. But let's be honest, did an entire city really fall because a giant piece of furniture was brought inside its walls? This episode does not appear in the Iliad as such, but in other later texts such as Virgil's Aeneid, written centuries later. In fact, Homer never narrates the fall of Troy directly. His poem ends before the episode of the horse. So, how real is this story? Many historians believe that the Trojan horse was not literal, but rather a metaphor or poetic distortion of a real military event. Some interesting theories include that the horse was actually a siege engine, like a battering ram or a mobile tower, which the Trojans captured, believing it to be useless. That the horse symbolized an earthquake or some natural disaster, since Poseidon, god of earthquakes and horses, was associated with both. Or that it was simply a military ruse, a deception or infiltration, which over time was embellished by poets until it became a giant wooden statue. And in many ancient cultures, myths were exaggerated to teach lessons, in this case, the warning against arrogance and naivety. The Trojans thought they had won, and let their guard down. The price was their entire city. The horse, then, became a symbol of perfect deception, to the point that today we use the term Trojan horse in computing, politics, literature, and memes. So while there probably never was a giant horse rolling through the streets of Troy, It is quite possible that there was indeed a clever strategy that allowed the Greeks to win. And like every good story, the myth just needed a real spark to burn like a legend. Troy wasn't just a city. Over time, it became a powerful idea, shaped and utilized by kings, empires, writers, and even dictators. After the fall of the city, real or mythical, its history did not die. Quite the opposite, it became a cultural, political, and propaganda tool. For the Greeks, Troy was the great defeated enemy, the symbol of Hellenic cunning. But for other peoples, Troy was a symbol of ancestral pride, a heroic civilization unjustly defeated. One of the best examples is the Roman Empire. According to legend, one of the few survivors of Troy was Aeneas, who escaped from the ruined city and, after a long journey, settled in Italy. From his lineage would come Romulus, the founder of Rome. Yes, Rome considered itself the direct heir of Troy. Coincidence? Not at all. This story was promoted and embellished by poets like Virgil, with his work the Iliad, written to praise the lineage of the Emperor Augustus. Thus, what began as an enemy myth was recycled to give Rome a noble and heroic root. We did not conquer Greece, we descended from its rivals. But it doesn't end there. In the Middle Ages, many European royal families claimed descent from Trojan heroes to legitimize their power with a glorious past. Even the British claimed to be descendants of Brutus of Troy, a supposed grandson of Aeneas. Already in the 20th century, the Nazis also became obsessed with Troy, supporting excavations and promoting the idea that the ancient Trojans were part of the Aryan origin. They used history as a mythical justification for their racial propaganda. The result? An ancient myth turned into a political weapon. Troy continues to fascinate today. Films, novels, TV series, and video games have been inspired by its history. But the most incredible thing is how a city partially destroyed more than 3,000 years ago became an eternal symbol of war, honor, betrayal, and propaganda. The real Troy may have gone underground, but its legacy continues to shape our culture, a perfect blend of history and myth that refuses to fade away.